Welcome back. My name is Melissa if you're new here. For today's video, we are going to talk about 5 controversial houseplant mistakes that I have done myself, and I think they're somewhat controversial in the plant community, and it's up to you to decide what will work for you and what doesn't. I think the most important thing to take away from this video is that there's many ways to grow plants and to do things, and just because something is on my list does not mean that my way is right or you shouldn't use this or do this. And that's totally fine. Everyone has their own methods and what works for them. But based off my experience and what has worked for me, these are going to be 5 things that I don't recommend as a plant parent if you want to get better at growing plants. Number 1, we are going to go right out of the gate and we are going to talk about watering. Moisture meters. This one here, this is called a moisture meter. It tests the moisture of the soil. It has little prongs. You stick it down in your soil in a couple different areas, and the little reader on here will tell you if your soil is still wet or moist, and if it's still moist, that you shouldn't water. This is a moisture meter that I purchased way back at the beginning of my plant journey, and I use this all the time. I do not recommend these because this caused me to overwater a lot of my plants. I personally do not think these are accurate. I feel like it's very hard to test the moisture of your soil all around. I feel like if your mix is really heavy aerated and chunky and it has a lot of that component in there, you're gonna have a hard time getting this down in there. And to check in multiple spots, I feel like these are not the best tool to guide you on how wet or dry your soil is. I know a lot of people swear by these and love them, but I do not recommend. I feel like there are so many more ways to check to see if your plants want or need water, and the easiest way is just by sticking your finger down into the soil. Usually your pot isn't deep enough so you can stick your finger down, and if the first few inches, if it feels dry, then it's probably time to water. If you feel moisture when you stick your finger down into the soil, then I would not water. I think the biggest thing is that plants can recover from underwatering a little bit better than if they're being constantly overwatered. Overwatering really is just the frequency of watering, how often you're watering. So if you watered your plant this day and you're not sure if your soil's wet and it's still wet and you give water, then that's going to increase your chance of root rot happening when you give water on top of already wet soil. So if you're not sure, just wait a few more days and your plant should do just fine. A couple other ways to tell your plants need water is just by feeling the pot. Lift the pot up out of the cache pot it's in, just lift the nursery pot up. If it feels light and the soil looks dry, then chances are it's probably dry and you can go ahead and water. And also just look at your plant. Once you have a plant in your care for a while, you tend to notice things about it. So if the stems are less firm, they tend to be droopy or curling, it can be a sign of underwatering. Now, those signs can be a sign of overwatering as well, but chances are if the soil is completely dry and your plant is experiencing those signs and it's been a while since you watered, chances are it is thirsty, and then you can go ahead and water. So I would say ditch the moisture meters and use your best judgment to tell if your plant is thirsty or not. Number 2 that I want to touch on is no light or low light. Light is so important, you guys. Back when I started my plant journey, I didn't realize how important light was, and my plants didn't really grow a whole lot because they didn't really get good light. And it's hard to determine what's good light when you're initially beginning your plant journey because you just don't know enough. You haven't experienced it enough. You just haven't gone through enough of that journey in order to figure out what is good light and what isn't good light. So here we are in the northern hemisphere, so south light is where most of the light is during the day when the sun rises to when the sun sets. Most of that light is coming through the brightest and the best in a south window. Most of us have a cellular phone that has a compass built into it, so just take out your compass on your phone and just face it towards your window, and it'll tell you which direction your window is facing. East gets a lot of morning sun, which is still great, and north is the least amount of light. I do not recommend north light for plants. And if you think about the distance from a window, the further you are from the window, the less light it's going to receive. You can invest in a light meter. This is one that I have purchased, and you can hold this up to the window where your plant is, and it'll tell you the amount of foot candles, the amount of light that your plant is receiving. It will change throughout the day depending on the light levels, of course. But if you want to get into more details about how much light your plant should actually be receiving, this is very helpful and is useful in determining how much light even from a grow light is giving off. Although this is helpful, I feel like this tool isn't really needed if you just monitor your plants, because you can't, depending on how many plants you have, you can't give all your plants the best light. You can give the best light to some of your favorites, and then some of the others may not get as much, and that is okay. You can rotate plants around. But I would just recommend placing your plants a foot or two back from a grow light for best optimal light, and then a foot or two back from a window for best optimal light. Here in my plant room, I have a big south window in front of me, and a lot of sun comes in, and a lot of those plants do receive some direct sun. Direct sun is when the light lands on the leaves. Indirect would be no light landing on the leaves. So if you don't see sunlight on your leaves, that would be indirect light. So I would not recommend placing a plant in the middle of your living room, on a shelf, in a bathroom with no window or no light just for decor purposes. I would not recommend that. The plant most likely will not do well, and it's going to struggle in those low light levels. If you think about light, light is the plant's food source, right? So they need light to photosynthesize and grow. So if they're getting extremely low levels of light, they're basically starving for food. So next time you think about that, make sure that you can give your plants optimal light levels, and trust me, you are going to see results. Number 3 that I want to touch on that is controversial is probably going to be drain holes. I feel like every plant needs to be able to drain the water that you give them, and you need to thoroughly be able to saturate that entire root system that's contained in the soil. If the water can't drain, then the excess salts and minerals that are built up in the soil over time can affect the way that your plant is growing. I do not recommend not having a drain hole. I love plastic pots. They are my favorite plastic nursery pots. They have tons of air holes and aeration. I also encourage the use of a aerated mix to help with airflow. Oxygen is so important in getting down into the root system. So having a more chunky mix, having those drain holes is going to be so important for your root health and overall growth of your plant. Glazed ceramic pots can hold on to a lot of moisture, and terracotta can wick away a lot of moisture. I tend to stay away from those pots. I do use a lot of heavy ceramic pots without a drain hole as a decorative pot, so I will take my plastic pot and sit it inside of a decorative pot. But I always tend to plant in a plastic pot. It is just more breathable, has a lot of drain holes, and it's just what I prefer, and it's what my plants tend to do well in. Unless you can dump that pot over and let that water drain, it's just going to increase the chance of the soil sitting wet for too long, increase that chance of your plant getting root rot, and it just allows for the excess of minerals to build up over time. And I just feel like it's just not healthy. So make sure your plants can drain and that they can get that aeration. It is just so important for growth. My plants don't need fertilizer. I don't feed my plants. They don't need that. The soil is fine. You need to be fertilizing your plants. You need to feed your plants. Fertilizers contain important minerals and nutrients your plant needs. Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the key elements in plant growth, and it's important to be using a fertilizer for your plants. Trust me, based off my experience, I used a plant food for almost 2 years, and I switched to an actual fertilizer. I currently use slow release Osmocote, and my plants have done a complete 180. My plant growth has just been phenomenal. So a plant food is not the same thing as a fertilizer. Make sure you are feeding your plants. If you don't feed your plants, those nutrients are going to get depleted out of the soil over time as you water the plant. And as you water the plant, those minerals and excess soil gets flushed out of the drain holes. And without nutrients, your plants may not grow. The growth could get small. They are more susceptible to pests and diseases and all sorts of stuff. So make sure you're feeding your plants over time. A lot of household bagged soils do contain nutrients, so you don't have to fertilize your plants right away, but I do recommend fertilizing in some time just so your plants can get those important nutrients that they need. They are potted plants. They are not out in nature where they can get nutrients and moisture from the air and surrounding elements around them. But here in our household indoor environments, it's really important to add back those nutrients and fertilize your houseplants. The last mistake that I want to talk about that you may be making with your plants, and I find it pretty controversial, is repotting your plants immediately after you get them. Just let your plants acclimate to your specific environment. When you purchase a plant, you don't know how long that plant has been in that environment. So if you're getting a plant from a greenhouse, it's more than likely having very optimal conditions where temperature is really warm, it's very humid, and plants thrive in that environment. And if you get a plant from a greenhouse and you take it home to where it's suboptimal levels, that plant is going to have a little bit of a harder time adjusting to your space. They will acclimate, it just takes some time. So it's really important not to mess with that plant and do a bunch of stuff with it right away. It's going to cause way more stress on that plant. Or if you're getting a plant from, say, a big box store or a plant swap, everyone's environment is different. Every location is different. That plant, if it was a new plant and just got shipped to that store, you don't know. That plant's been on a long journey. It came from one environment, it got boxed up, it's been in a dark box with no light, it just got put out on the shelf, and then you buy it and bring it home. So that plant has had a lot of traveling in the time from where it was grown, how it was grown, and then to where it was shipped, and then to your home. So if you think about all those changes, that's a lot on a plant. So if you think of yourself like moving from one location to another, it's all new, you're going through a lot of changes, it can be stressful. Same for a plant, it's going from one environment to another. It needs that time to just get used to your space, your humidity levels, your light levels, your temperature inside. There's so many factors that can go into it and how your plant acclimates. If your plant wasn't the healthiest from the beginning and it's going into suboptimal levels, then it could have a harder time adjusting. Just like if you're getting a plant shipped to you in the mail, it's gone through a journey. It went from one person's home to a dark box to your home. It's going to take a little bit of time to kind of perk up and just kind of settle in. So it's important to not mess with your plant right away. Some people are adamant about repotting their plants. There are certain circumstances that you should repot right away, such as the plant came in just horrible condition, meaning the soil is sopping wet. And depending on the type of plant it is, it may be better for the plant to go ahead and get it into a better substrate so that you don't cause rot. But I think the most important thing is just letting your plant acclimate. No two plants are going to react the same. So I like to give them about a week or two just to adjust. Some plants may need longer time, some plants could take less time, but I think 2 weeks is a perfect amount of time for them to kind of settle in. So those are my 5 mistakes that are controversial, or 5 things that you can change about your plant care and routine to hopefully get your plants growing and doing better for you. I really hope you found this video helpful. And again, these are just my reasonings. I am not an expert, and you may do some of these things and you may disagree with that, and that is perfectly fine. There's not a rule book on plant care, but these are just my thoughts and opinions and what has worked for me and what has helped my plants grow and do better for me. Thank you guys so much for watching and being here, and I will talk to you guys soon.